The Tet Offensive marked a major shift in the American public's attitudes about the Vietnam War. As a part of the intelligence community's continuing efforts at greater transparency and furthering public understanding about our activities, our senior historians panel has recommended material for public release relating to the intelligence community's role in the Tet Offensive. I have several gentlemen joining us today to talk a little bit about this effort and the IC's role in the Vietnam War. So with the Tet Offensive, we're talking about over 100 different engagements all across the country, including in areas that were previously considered to be totally protected from any kind of fighting, like Saigon. And this has, while maybe not a military victory in the end, certainly a strategic defeat for the United States that faced the challenges at home based on the way the battle was perceived.
This attack occurs during what is a Vietnamese holiday. Tet is a holiday period, so many of the South Vietnamese troops are on leave. And even some of the prognostications in advance that had talked about expecting some sort of major offensive, they still anticipated that the offensive would come before or after Tet, not during the holiday itself. So in that sense, it is somewhat of a surprise.
And Tet offensives are annual affairs, just not this large. Spring offensives. CIA is getting a lot of reporting from the field. There's fewer defectors, and there were always a lot of communist defectors, and they slacked off in the fall of 1967. Nobody wants to defect and go over to the other side if the war is going to be over in 2 weeks or 2 months, because if your side wins, they're going to come looking for you. So we have fewer defectors. More POWs reporting that something's coming up in the new year, that the war is going to be over. And so we report that as well. NSA, as I recall, and CIA as well, getting a lot of information from road watch teams in Laos and Cambodia. There's an awful lot of men and material coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, an upspike at the end of the year. And it's going somewhere and it's for a purpose, but they notice an increase in activity.
Yeah. Yes, and I think it's worth pointing out that the NSA and the service cryptologic agencies that worked with us were monitoring enemy communications. There was clear evidence that some sort of offensive, widespread offensive was going to happen, but the warnings were taken a little more lightly, I think, than they should have been. And I have to admit that I think even NSA didn't understand from its source material the widespread nature, that there were enemy actions in virtually every major urban area, most of the provinces. We were able to predict perhaps close to the magnitude of the event, but not what it was going to mean.
It might come out in one of the releases that the attacks in Saigon in particular are meant to have a heavy media aspect to them, attacking the presidential palace, attacking the U.S. Embassy, attacking MACV headquarters at Tan Son Nhut Airport, taking over the Saigon radio station. These are all meant to get media attention, and they did.
Right, there's public polling in late '67 that suggests that the public confidence in President Johnson's policy is actually increasing. So with Tet, we see the reversal.
There was the administration and even Westmoreland in Vietnam speaking optimistically that the war is being won in late 1967, that 68 is going to be the mop-up year. More areas liberated from the communists, more communist casualties, and Westmoreland, of course, appearing on Capitol Hill and talking about not the end of the tunnel, but he used a quote similar to "We have an end in sight here," and so the public becoming optimistic that yes, this is paying off. And then when Tet takes place, and you see on the nightly news the attacks, you see the very famous photograph of the Saigon police chief summarily executing a Viet Cong right in the street with a point-blank pistol shot to the head, coming into America's living room, And this is not the war. This is not the situation we were told it was. And so you have the rapid turnaround. And I think there's also the case that the Johnson administration kind of blew the narrative that we went from winning in the fall of 1967 to Johnson declaring in late March that he's not going to run again for re-election. So a wholesale reversal. And I think the public just kind of followed that along, that this was now a long war without end.
Following up on that point, one of the authors that's written about Vietnam War and about the Tet Offensive recently has characterized it as a public relations defeat rather than an intelligence failure. So the policymakers are more aware of what's going on, but that word never gets to the general public.
Yeah, and you have incoming Secretary of Defense Clark Clifford saying that the pressure was so intense that you feel like the government's going to come apart at the seams. And it's hard to imagine that based on what the public had been told by the administration leading into those events.
I think it was Johnson who took note of the fact that Walter Cronkite, often believed to be the most trusted man in America, had come out against the war.
If you lose Cronkite, you've lost America.
You've lost the war.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That we have several generations that have come of age since these events took place. Can you describe a little bit about what took place during the Tet Offensive and how it could have had such a significant impact?
The military in Vietnam, both ARVN and United States forces, react quite quickly, and most of the gains the communists make are erased within days or weeks. It goes back to the way it was before TET. Most of the communist attacks are not well coordinated. They're not sustained. They're kind of a one throw of the dice, and you have a plan A, but there's no plan B, and plan A doesn't work. I think of the attack on the embassy. They blow a hole in the wall, they get on the grounds. A small group of communist sappers, they never get into the buildings. So there's a gunfight, there's a firefight on the grounds, but it's over in a matter of hours. But the media is there taking color films of it, and it's going out on the wire worldwide. So it looks worse than it actually is.
The impact was much worse.
Yeah.
It should be pointed out, as you say, we recovered from it to pre-TET levels within days, sometimes maybe a couple of weeks in a few cases. But the fighting eradicated the Viet Cong as a coherent fighting force.
Yes.
From then on, the war was fought by the North Vietnamese regulars
yes.
and mainline troops.
Following on to that point too, we're hoping that some of the declassified documents will also shed more light on the North Vietnamese way of thinking about the campaign as a whole. And from their perspective, what we have concluded is that this may not be an all or nothing campaign for them, but it's very close to that. And what they're hoping to have happen is that simultaneous with the Tet Offensive, there will be a massive uprising of South Vietnamese supporting the Tet Offensive. That doesn't happen, which means from a North Vietnamese perspective, the Tet Offensive fails.
How or did the experience of going through TET, did that change the way the intelligence community did business at that time, or what did we learn that we applied to the balance of the Vietnam conflict and then onward from there?
I think I would say in terms of lessons learned, maybe it would be more accurate to say that what the Tet Offensive experience does for the intelligence community is to more finely hone the skill that we already were involved in. We tend to think of intelligence practice as a craft. Obviously, a craftsman gets better with more experience, learns from mistakes, either real or perceived. And so hopefully in that sense, the IC emerges from the Tet Offensive stronger than it was before.
Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for your time and your insights today, and I'd like to invite everyone to review the materials released as a part of the TET Declassified project on Intel.gov. Thank you.